We're going to centralize both the comments and the questions in the chat box. You can find the chat box bubble icon in the bottom right of your screen. Set aside 15 to 20 minutes at the end for a question and answer session. But don't feel you have to wait until then. If you have questions or comments emerging at any point during the presentation, please share them in the chat. And we can, in some cases, perhaps even answer them as we go along, and otherwise tackle them at the end. Finally, I'd like to note that this is the second in a two-part series. And so we're going to start off today by giving a little recap for those of you who weren't able to join the first in the series. So I think we can advance to the next slide. Fantastic. So a couple of key takeaways. What we're talking about today is a recently released paper called Shifting the Locus of Learning. And that paper, which was released in roughly January, had a couple of key takeaways. One of them is that based on a lot of research and practical observation, we identify that learning is fundamental to the process of economic development. Nevertheless, it's frequently seen by development programs, is less frequently seen by development programs as a critical function with systems. And yet it truly does have the capacity to catalyze and quicken systemic change, build the resilience, the inclusivity, and the competitiveness of target market systems, and enable adaptation. Secondly, programs can and should shift the locus of learning away from being program focused or funder oriented towards a systemic focus. This means having a shift in the agency from a program that is centered in the middle of the learning process to one that enhances the capacity of market actors, such as firms, other organizations, government, and the system itself to be capable of better learning and adapting on their own. And that is fundamental to long-term and transformative change. So if we shift to the next slide then, this is really an opportunity for us to move from essentially the first part of the paper, which we focused on in the webinar series. That was one where we had influencers at USAID who unpacked the importance of catalyzing private sector learning to drive systemic change. If you haven't had a chance to attend, I highly recommend it. And within it, there are a lot of practical examples of where they see opportunities to apply this paper and its lessons in their work. Today, we're moving the conversation from being focused at the level of funders to being focused at the level of implementers. So today, we're going to have firm leaders and practitioners unpack where firms, ecosystem actors, and programs have been practically taking on this work and strengthening the capabilities at firm and system level. I'm joined today by 4 illustrious panelists. We have George Baka, who's the general manager at Parasente in Uganda. We have Arjun Bhupal, who's the head of partnerships at Gatsby Africa and is based in Kenya. We have Ricardo Irias, or Rick, who is a co-founder and CEO at Sube Latino America, and he's based in Honduras. We also have Kata Mejia, who's the entrepreneurship and youth component coordinator for ACDI VOCA Honduras and their Transforming Market Systems program, also based in Honduras. And finally, my name is Ben Fowler. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Market Share Associates, and I'm based in Denver. Great, let's move on to the next slide. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be, as I mentioned, tackling the second portion of the paper, which outlines 10 different strategies that can be used to enhance learning. The first 3 are strategies that are targeted at specific market actors. They include things like customer centricity, data collection and analysis, and business model innovations. And we're going to hear about several of those examples today. The remaining 7 are focused at the system level. And we're going to hear other examples from our panelists today of where they've been tackling those types of strategies. So this is our orienting framework for everything that we're going to be hearing for the remainder of the hour. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, before we dive in and we have some nitty-gritty discussions with our panelists, I'm going to turn the floor over to Arjun. And I'd be very curious to hear from Arjun as somebody who's working with an organization that features quite prominently in the paper, for having a range of different examples of putting some of these concepts into practice, to talk with us a little bit more. In brief, Arjun, I know Gatsby has really focused a lot on this, and you've even honed your strategic focus towards sector level transformation. Can you say a little bit more about why you've made this a key part of your work?
Sure, Ben, and thank you for having me on the panel, and hello to everyone who's joining us today. Yeah, as you said in your introduction, Ben, at Gatsby Africa, we're really focused on sector transformation. And so when we use the word sectors, we actually mean subsectors or industries like commercial forestry or textiles, livestock, aquaculture. So those are some of the sectors we're in. And what we're aiming to drive within these sectors is really large scale impact and growth that is sustained over the long term. So growth that is competitive, inclusive, and quite crucially to us, resilient as well. I think we can all think of examples of sectors that have been very promising, but then have collapsed or stalled for various reasons. And so for us, the learning agenda that you're talking about today is absolutely central to building resilience in sectors. So that's the ability of the sector or system to continue to innovate, adapt, and respond to new threats, opportunities, and shocks. And without this core element of learning, sharing information, and coordination, we feel it's almost impossible to sustain growth over the long term. So I guess in a nutshell, that's why this agenda is so important to us and why resilience is core to our approach. Yeah, I'll hand over back to you, Ben.
Thanks so much. I think that really helps set the stage for how some of the concepts here are being applied and embraced by some of the leading organizations in our sector. Wonderful. Well, now I'm going to turn it, as we promised, today's really going to be an opportunity to hear some really practical examples from our panelists of where this is being put into practice. So I'm going to turn it over to Kata and Rick to give us, to have an opportunity to share a little bit more about what they've been doing in the context of Honduras and the Transforming Market Systems program to illustrate these concepts.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to be here and share this space with one of TMS's amazing partners, Sube Latinoamerica, a Honduran fintech who is working to change how MSMEs do e-commerce in the region. So we only have 3 minutes, so let's get at it. Back in 2018, during TMS's inception phase, we needed to learn more about the different sectors that were leading the country's economic growth and who were those main actors or stakeholders who were relevant in leading in each sector. TMS identified Sube Latinoamerica, a dynamic fintech startup who recognized the tremendous potential of digital technologies in revolutionizing how businesses operate. They understood that for Honduras to fully embrace the digital age, it was crucial to integrate e-commerce and digital payment solutions into the core business models of enterprises. Sube wanted to transform the landscape of e-commerce and digital payments, shaping an ecosystem that benefited businesses and consumers alike. Sube was also looking for a partner who would enable them to develop a scalable, revenue-based subscription business model specifically designed to support the adoption of e-commerce by MSMEs in Honduras. And on the other hand, TMS was looking for a local champion who knew the constraints the country and MSMEs had to adopt e-commerce and could lead the process to find a better way of fostering e-commerce usage. So, Sube was one of TMS's first partnerships back in 2019. And one of our first learning experiences happened when we needed to figure out what was stopping MSMEs from using e-commerce technology in Honduras. As the paper mentions in the 10 intervention strategy highlight, we needed to go into the system level performance data and understand it to figure out where we needed to focus our efforts. Sube had an idea. They had conducted market research which showed that there was lack of information about e-commerce and no knowledge on what e-commerce and fintech was. And worst of all, fear and rejection of making online payments. Sube understood that education and guidance were key to empowering MSMEs on their e-commerce journey. So together, we realized Sube needed to make a decision and strengthen their internal capacities by innovating in their business model. Sube launched the Sube Academy, an educational content platform that offered valuable resources, troubleshooting tips, and a vibrant community where entrepreneurs could learn from one another and receive ongoing support from the company. This established a consumer-centric strategy where Sube understood their clients' situation and were willing to pivot and give enterprises education to empower them through knowledge and push the use of the e-commerce tools Sube provided. We also needed to figure out a way to bring MSMEs to participate and commit to a 12-month e-commerce program that included an e-commerce fintech certification and various tools to be able to sell online. So Sube launched the Sube Journey, a user-friendly and interactive path that guided entrepreneurs through the necessary steps to embrace e-commerce and expand their customer base. Integrating elements of gamification as MSMEs achieved the different steps that would take them to the prize, online sales creation. Learning and adapting has also been a constant in this project. Sube works on a monthly basis on listening to their clients and adapting their platform based on their feedback. They have introduced new features and functionalities that cater to the specific needs of MSMEs in Honduras. From WhatsApp orderings to customizable product options, Sube is making sure their platform was tailored to meet the demands of the local market. But Sube's work and impact hasn't stopped there. And now I would love to welcome Ricardo Irias, CEO and co-founder of Sube Latinoamérica and president of the Honduran FinTech Association, to the conversation. Ricardo, thank you for joining us today. And I would love to start with you sharing a bit more about yourself and Sube's mission as a private sector company in Honduras.
Well, Katarina, thank you. And thank you all for having me in this panel. Good morning. 6 years ago, my co-founder Victor Aguirre and I set out to through a private company, build a way to have entrepreneurs improve their quality, their standards of living. What we penned in our mission statement was Tuve helps social mobility in Honduras. So we want people to improve their standards of living. And Victor, as a software engineer, I have a major in business. So we built an e-commerce platform. We also had e-commerce backgrounds. We built a website builder because there were very few websites operating in Honduras and a payments gateway. And we have evolved a lot from there, and I'll tell you more about it, hopefully in other questions. But our business model is a software as a service model. So we develop the software and we rent it out for yearly fees. We're now a team of 18 people, and we're working, Kata, on achieving that mission.
Thank you, Ricardo. So it's been almost 4 years of us collaborating and working together on this project. We're coming close to celebrating our work anniversary this coming August. And I would like for you to share with today's audience some of those specific learning moments that Sube has shared with TMS that have caused your business model to adapt and change.
Yes. So in the beginning, we saw ourselves as a technology platform for e-commerce. And as we had so many conversations with TMS, we understood that the problem that we were trying to solve, meaning the problem that we saw was that businesses were not using technology in their sales processes or technology to manage their businesses. And we're trying to solve that problem with our platform, but we realized that problem was not in a vacuum. It was linked to many other problems, right? And so we needed to solve other problems as well if we wanted people to come on board our platform and use it and be successful. But we couldn't solve all the problems. So, the very specific learning that we had is we need to build a vertical integration of solutions that take our entrepreneurs, our target segment, from where they are now to a situation in which they're having recurring sales because of everything they have learned and the technology that we give them. And so our model has evolved from being a pure technology platform to becoming more of a business service provider. So we have integrated a learning management system. We have built online courses. These courses have transformed into programs, incubation program for e-commerce, an acceleration program for e-commerce, and these programs now have mentors. So all our participants, all of our entrepreneurs get a personalized mentorship throughout the process. And so we don't see ourselves purely as a technology company anymore. We're more of a business service provider.
Thank you, Ricardo. And on that note, I know that Suba's team has grown and learning and adapting has become part of Suba's core as a business. How do you think Suba's internal capacity for learning changed and how's it improved because of our work together?
Yeah. So, a lot of this evolution and a lot of this learning capacity increase, let's call it, comes from all the questions that we get from TMS, right? On when we report on what we're doing and the impact we're having, we take those questions back home and we talk about them and we think, okay, well, what could we do to make this better? And for example, we implemented one of the questions was what our learning process was like, and learning for us has always been very important at a personal level and as a company. And getting these questions and having these conversations took us to, okay, let's implement a wiki, like an internal system where we document our validated processes, and we have many diagrams and documented processes there. And we've also, this is something we enjoy, just producing content, and so we use a LMS that we acquired working with TMS to build courses for our team members. So we have the induction process in our LMS. We have curated content for our team members. We have 2 spaces a week to learn. On Fridays, we have the Sharpening the Saw Fridays, which is a 2 to 3 hour space to absorb content, to learn, to make courses, and so on. And on Mondays, we have a space for everyone to speak and present what they've learned. That's how we keep learning internally. And we learn from our community of entrepreneurs by we have a process with mentors in which they report on what they see during the incubation and acceleration programs, and they report it up. We meet, we think about new solutions, we build prototypes, we interview our entrepreneurs, we give them the prototypes for them to play with them, and when we think that what we've built is good for them and we get that feedback from them, we launch it into our live system. So I mean, we have implemented many learning processes in our daily work, and a lot of this got that comes from just having conversations with you guys and seeing different points of view on how we can learn.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's amazing. And to close our conversation, I would like you to tell us what do you think is the overall value of TMS's support for your company and the broader system, fintech system in Honduras?
There's a lot of value in a relationship like this, because what the problem that we're trying to solve is very complex and it takes a lot of time. There is a reason why this problem exists, and nobody has been able to solve it in so many years. Not the government and the private companies don't have the economic incentive to solve it because it's very hard to achieve sustainability with it. So TMS has become more of an investor to us. You're playing more of an investor role, and you've given us a chance to experiment, to iterate, to implement new solutions, to adapt. And you've opened doors for us. So the thing about this investor-like relationship is that we share a common purpose, right? And we have different strengths, all right, and different perspectives as well. So we're more of a technology-oriented. We have more of a technology-oriented mindset, and when we speak with you, you give us more of the systemic point of view, right? So in all these conversations, we learn more about the systemic problem and how things are tied together. And so we go back to the drawing board and we start thinking about how to solve these problems and how to build a vertical integration of solutions that take our entrepreneurs from where they are to becoming very successful, or at least selling more and increasing their standard of living. So yeah, there's many specific details, Kata, on how this has worked, but I think mainly a good summary of it is you guys are being very good guides and more like investors to us with a very clear mindset on getting this problem solved sustainably.
Thank you, Ricardo, for sharing today the great work you guys are doing to foster MSME digitalization in Honduras. And back to you, Ben.
So much. Fantastic to get to hear more of the specifics on how this is working. Fantastic. Well, now I'm going to turn it over to share a little bit about our second example, this being one of the Inclusive Agricultural Markets program in Uganda. And I'm going to be talking to George Baca, who's the general manager of Patasente in doing so. So first, a little bit of background on IAM itself. And if we want to switch over to the next slide, that would be great. IAM is a 5-year-long USAID-funded initiative in Uganda, implemented by DAI with Market Share Associates as one of its partners, and with an aim to increase incomes, improve the livelihoods of households in ag-led inclusive economic growth. And it's working in northern, western, and eastern Uganda. IAM has a focus on cross-cutting sectors rather than value chains, things like inputs, agri-processing, digital financing, and embedded business development services. As part of the kickoff for the launch of IAM, one of the steps taken was to get a sense of what were the learning dynamics in place within the agricultural sector within Uganda. And that meant rolling out a series of system-focused measurement tools to understand the state of actor and system level learning, the degree of trust and cooperation between market actors, the quality and strength of relationships, and the general level of business innovation occurring within the sector. And those system measurement tools uncovered that there were challenges existing within many of those measures in terms of the degree to which learning was happening and critically being shared within the sector so that the learning being done by one partner was benefiting others. This had implications such as pivots happening relatively slowly by firms and relatively more limited innovation occurring. For IAM, that posed a challenge in that these difficulties and challenges around learning were going to put at risk the ability of its interventions to lead to effective change, and when they do, for that change to be a change that was going to create sector level impacts. So as one of the suite of solutions that IAM used to do it was to introduce a tool via its partner Market Share Associates called Fast Cycle Learning. This is an example of the first of the strategies outlined in the Shifting the Locus of Learning paper, focused on customer centricity and supplier insights. And as identified in the paper, identifying and using customer centricity as a tool proved to be a very effective way that IAM could engage with some of its partners in a way that was going to both create business impact while also enhancing learning capacity at the same time. So the Fast Cycle Learning tool is one in which IAM works alongside its partners to enhance their ability to engage in learning and inform key business decisions. It helps partners to identify the key assumptions and risks that are underlying the inclusive business model pilots that they're undertaking in collaboration with IAM, determine the best way to capture information to test those assumptions, and then to take action based on that by analyzing the information and data that come in. Some features of this fast cycle learning approach are a focus on quick information at a low cost, making it something that can be done repeatedly rather than a large one-off study. Focusing on asking questions in a relatively standardized way that enables comparison and benchmarking against competitors, and a honed in laser focus on understanding where within the customer or the supplier journey, the kind of next pivots within the business model really rely, and focusing there. So with that as a quick orientation and background to the approach that IAM has been using with some of its partners, I'm now going to turn over to talking with you, George, because I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own experience working with IAM and with fast cycle learning. So as a start, perhaps you can give a very quick overview to Patacente and the type of company that you are and the type of mission that you have.
Yeah, so my name is George Baka. Thanks, Ben, again. And I lead basically a company called Patacente. It's a trade services platform with a social mission to make markets work for everyone. And we basically began it by thinking about how might we assist buyers in agriculture supply chains, basically factories, have consistent reliable supply of good quality product at good payment terms on one hand, but also allow the producers on the other hand of this product to consistently sell it and be paid in the best way possible, right? And that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, and we've facilitated over $10 million worth of trade on our platform. Yes.
That's really great. Maybe I'd love to hear more if you could elaborate a little bit. At the point that you started collaborating with IAM, what were some of the key learning challenges that you were facing as a company?
That's a very good question, Ben. So at the time, we are basically trying to build a business model or trying to actually do a change in our business model in a way that we wanted to see how could we get buyers of this agricultural product to actually buy it through our platform. And intently, how could we or how might we convince suppliers, that's basically farmers and farming groups, to basically sell their product through our platform the very time when we built it. So going into the partnership with FTFIM was basically to actually allow us to build the platform out, but also basically begin to build the early users who are supposed to go into the platform. But once we got into that, then the bigger question then became, how might we increase the stickiness of the platform to our users? How do we make them actually use it more? How do we get buyers to consistently use it? How do we get warehousing facilities who sell through our platform to actually use it? And how do we get farmers to actually also begin to use it? And that's how the FCL framework actually came in. Yeah.
That's great. What were some of the key questions that you were asking yourself and key kind of assumptions that were kind of top of mind in determining whether your business model was likely to work or not?
Yeah, that's another good question again. So for us, it was two things. So first of all, we needed to pay farmers in advance for them to sell product for our platform. Right? So there was a very big question around will farmers actually pay back when we advance them money through supply for our platform, or they could actually side sell. Then these farmers basically move the product through warehousing facilities who are also linked on our platform and they sell us the final end factory. So there's a very big question around, will they actually pull product from the farmers and also basically deliver it successfully down up to the factory? And the last bit, we are taking a credit risk on the factories, right? So if we supply them product that is basically payable 30, 90 days later, will they actually pay us, right? So those are the key big assumptions that we had when we basically went into this partnership here.
Great, thanks. And so what kind of questions did you explore and what kind of data did you gather in collaboration with IAM to help identify and answer some of those questions?
Yeah, so very good. So with IAM and FCL, the first thing was what's the value that your buyers are basically finding onto the platform when you basically began getting on it? And is there anything they expect you more to do that you are not doing? The same thing was the same for the warehousing facilities. What's the value they find it? What makes them happy? What makes them satisfied? What do they expect from you? How do you basically figure that out? And then we had a little bit of a challenge that we noticed that we had some user groups like factories and warehouses using the platform, but we didn't see usage at the farm level, right? So that kind of sparked a conversation in us. It means there are users on our platform who find value and use it, and there are some users who actually don't find value in it. So for us, the broader question then became, okay, we're now into the market. but how do we make this platform more intuitive to basically respond to the different needs of the users who are actually on our platform? And that's when we basically went into the application of this FCL framework. And intently, for us, it was wanted a framework that assists us ask very specific questions to get clear expectations from us and then match it with what we are doing at Pataset. Yeah. Mm.
Great. That's a great seg, because what I wanted to find out from you was, what did you find as a result of that, or what impact has that learning had for you as a company?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So the very first thing was our first learning was, and I keep saying it's kind of a surprise, but our first learning was that buyers expected us to guarantee product quality. For all product that we are buying through our platform, buyers wanted to say, Pataset, you are adequately responsible for this. The second bit was the warehousing facilities through which this product comes to go to the factories expected us to meet other needs beyond simply getting them to the factories and paying them on delivery, which was Pataset assist us improve the quality of our warehousing. So it was actually interesting that what buyers were expecting us to do also was kind of reflected already at the warehousing facility level, asking us, please, Pataset, we are selling through your platform. Quality is a must. We are making lots of loss when we supply. Assist us improve the quality of this. And then the third was farmers initially weren't getting direct access to us. For them, they said, we're only going to sign up on this platform if we see actual tangible value coming to us, because we still feel our product. If you're not investing in our farms to assist us to produce, then why the hell are we selling through the platform? So
That's great. That's
so
great. That's wonderful. And I'm going to ask one very final question, maybe with a very short reply as well. But looking beyond the particular learning you had in that case, what have you seen as the differences that this experience has had to your broader and longer term approach to learning and kind of gathering information that informs the decisions that you're making within Patasente?
And quickly, just before that, I think what then resulted into doing this was that we modified our business model a bit and told our buyers that we are going to be responsible for product quality. And we began doing what we are calling a warehouse improvement program within our business, where we do invest in warehouses to improve quality of warehousing and then give direct advances to farmers to produce through those warehouses. And we have seen a very significant growth in the volumes of trade happening onto our platform. Now, to your question on how are we, embedding this within the operation of our company, is the FCL framework has remained a complete guide in when we think about, okay, how do we further improve what we are doing? Because even what we are applying now is a learning. So now it's about every time ask yourself good question about what more can I do for my users? And what that you can't do, how might I do it differently? And we're also doing a little bit of some experiments around things we have learned after we've implemented this and we can't do them with Pataset. What can that might look like? Yeah. Mm.
Well, that's fantastic. So much. I really appreciate that. Well, last but not least, I want to pass it now to Arjun, who's going to give us a perspective from Gatsby Africa.
Thanks again, Ben. And it's been really great hearing from Ricardo and George about their experiences. I think that resonates a lot with us at Gatsby, dynamic entrepreneurs and firms, and really firm level learning and adaptation is crucial to the sort of work we're trying to do. But what I'll do now is I'll spend a few minutes just talking about sort of some of the system levels sort of solutions we try and embed in our work. And I'll use the livestock sector in Kenya as an example, and specifically we're in the red meat value chain. And in this example, I'll talk a little bit about how we've worked initially at firm level and then looked at how we could embed functions at the systemic level. But first, just a very brief sort of context. The livestock sector in Kenya is really important to the economy. About 8 million pastoralists depend on the sector for their livelihoods. The sector is largely informal. Only less than 10% of meat goes through the cold chain. And so food safety and quality and consumer awareness on these issues is really important. And so this example has to do with food safety and quality. So in 2015, we started working with the newly set up meat processor, that was looking to target the domestic market, but their business model wasn't really working. So we worked with them to build, to help them implement a food safety standard, international standard called HACCP, which then allowed them to access export markets, and they started exporting in 2016. And so that made their business model work. But what we also did was build the capacity in terms of management and corporate governance that allowed the processor to continue to look for new market opportunities. And they're now, I would say, in the top 2 or 3 largest in terms of volumes, export service slaughterhouses in East Africa. So moving beyond that, we looked at how we could embed this approach or these functions at a systemic level. And we looked around to see which partners we could work with. We found a strong sector association focused on the domestic market, the Retail Trade Association, but we didn't find there wasn't an existing industry association for exporters. So we convened the private sector, and out of that, the private sector formed an industry association for exporters, ChemLake, and we worked with both industry associations to build their capacity and also help them develop a code of conduct around food safety that could help them self-regulate the sector. We also brought in the government, the State Department of Livestock, who endorsed RETRAC's code of safety for the domestic market. And that really helped the industry associations work with their members to embed food safety and quality standards in their work. So that was going a step beyond the firm level, and then we went a step beyond that, and we looked at how we could create coordination mechanisms within the sector. And so in 2021, we worked with the industry associations, the State Department of Livestock, and Nation Media Group, one of the large media companies. And we designed and held Kenya's first Meat Expo, which really was a B2B forum bringing businesses together, but was also aimed at raising consumer awareness around issues of food safety, cold chain. And this year, in 2023, we ran the second Meat Expo, and this time around, our Gatsby's sort of involvement in terms of planning and implementing it was much lower. So, it was great to see the sector stakeholders really owning and driving the process this second time around. So that's been a really quick example from livestock, and I think I'll just share a few reflections on based on our experience of implementing system level learning and solutions over the past 10 years in various sectors. One, it takes time. It's not easy, it takes time, and it really requires strong relationships with sector stakeholders, that trust and credibility with the sector stakeholders. The approaches you can take also depend on the type of sector and the context, and in particular, the phase of maturity of sectors. Very nascent sectors are challenging because often you don't have existing functions or institutions that you can plug into. And finally, the political economy of the sector is really important, because without a favorable political economy, it's difficult to have dynamic firms, to have a fair competitive environment, to have governments really investing in the capacity needed in the staff and incentives to take an adaptive approach to policy making and regulation. So those are some quick reflections, and hopefully that example sort of gives you a sense of how we at Gatsby try and embed functions within various system and sector sort of institutions. Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. All right, I'd love to quickly cycle back to our image that shows the different strategies from the paper, because I think one of the interesting reflections is just how many different strategies we heard our different presenters today speaking to. We heard about the first one on customer centricity and supplier insights being used as a focus for IAM. We also heard it from TMS. The business model innovations came out strongly from all three of the different examples. In our last discussion with Arjun, we heard about, and from TMS, number 4, about organizations building trust and facilitating information sharing. And those often take the form of sector associations that are able to bring new information and help disseminate information from among their members. And the different strategies that were used to help enhance the capacity of those organizations, or in some cases to even launch such organizations that are able to do so. I think we also heard with number 6 about enhancing the capacity of learning service providers to be able to bring and build the capacity of different market actors on their learning. And then finally, I think some of the examples that came out of Gatsby Africa really spoke to the system level performance data and the way that that kind of data can prove to help benchmark and to spur interest and an incentive for change, foster an incentive for change, as we did with Uganda when different companies from the same sector have their data anonymously compared. So one of the things that I think really stands out is that these 10 strategies are not ones that are often being done in isolation with just a single one being used. They instead are often being used in combination to have a bigger impact. So with that quick summary, I'd love to prompt and pose a first question before we leave it up to the panelists, or to the audience rather, to share some of your questions and start diving into those. I'd like to briefly ask our panelists, what is your one biggest piece of advice for other donor programs who hear this story and are inspired to do more? And I'm going to start by turning it over to George.
Thanks, Ben, again. I think for us, the very first one that when donors partner with private sector players like Pata Center, then it starts with a certain kind of framework of questions or answers or deliverables that have to be delivered within the context of the project. But as you basically learn and begin to implement your business model into the market, you begin to learn new things that actually require a completely different approach of what you have to do. So my very first point would be to encourage donors to be totally flexible, in the sense that whatever we set out to do in the very beginning might completely be different from what we actually do in the implementation of the course of that project once we learn new things about what we implement. For example, if you allow me, Ben, I would give an example, is we learned, for example, in us that the moment we decided to respond to the needs of the factories, the warehouses, and the farmers, then we had to go deep in to actually do that. Then we couldn't do any other thing that was needed by our users. If our users, like farmers, wanted inputs, we couldn't do that if we are also doing warehouse improvements. And if they wanted logistics, we couldn't do that even when we are working with them. What has happened now is that we have had to have new platforms emerge out of our system to actually serve those needs. And I have to go back to my funders and say there is a flexibility in how we're implementing this project, and please be flexible. So for me, that's what I would say, that once you learn new things, let donors be flexible in how these organizations implement them, such that we still achieve the end goals we want to achieve. Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Ben. So my biggest piece of advice for donor programs is that you explore playing a role of a social investor instead of a donor role. So define the problems you want to solve, and then look and find for entrepreneurs that are willing and able to find sustainable solutions to these problems. don't fall in love with any particular solution. Keep the problem in mind. Try to solve the problem, and look for entrepreneurs that are willing and able to make a living out of this solution. And as an investor rather than a donor, there is a lot more that you can do. You can work together with the companies or the startups you decide to start working with, and finding this solution together and finding the sustainability model together. And then when you find a few of these companies and startups that bring the solutions and build the sustainable models, then you're going to have a systemic impact.
Great, thank you. Kata, what's your perspective?
Thanks, Ben. I think from the implementer side, working on the ground, focusing on making a good effort and putting time into mapping out those champions in the system who are willing to change and adapt, who have similar objectives as you and maybe don't know how to transform or change, at the beginning of the project is very important. For us, TMS's inception phase was really important at this early stage. I know not all programs have the IQ contract that we have, but working during the co-creation, to integrate the power shift in the project and letting the market actor lead has been key to our impact. I could also add patience and empathy that work a lot too when managing partnerships. Because of the big pool of private and public actors we work with, understanding their internal constraints, learning from them, and coming up with solutions together is also something I think should be prioritized in implementation.
That's great. And finally, to round it out, Arjun, what's your take?
Ben, so maybe two quick thoughts from my side. One is start early, so really build this approach and thinking into the design, the inception, and start looking for partners and testing solutions in year one of implementation. Don't wait till the end. And then second, I think donors and implementers can work together to design programs in a way that give the programs the freedom and flexibility. And I think that I think one of the other panelists mentioned that as well. But I think, for example, thinking about the right objectives and KPIs to allow this long-term approach, because often the impact may take a long time to materialize, and sometimes may even materialize after the life of the program. So how do you allow for that sort of approach rather than holding programs to short-term metrics?
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Well, that's a great intro to our Q&A discussion. What I'm now going to do is turn it over to a question that was asked by Kathy, and it was directed at Kata. So Kata, maybe you can take this one on. It's asking if you could speak a little bit to the role of ACDI VOCA's staff when engaging with SUBE Latinoamerica, and what may have happened to the business model if the TMS program had not been available to invest and engage.
Thank you, Kathy, for that question. So I think that definitely, as Ricardo mentioned, since the beginning, we started figuring out what was going to be each of our roles if we started this partnership, right? We knew this wasn't a traditional partnership because Ricardo's company wasn't just a private sector company, but there was also a startup, right? A technological startup, and those companies grow real fast, and they, as Ricardo mentioned, are centered in technology and growth. So where did we find this balance, right? To achieve those objectives that we wanted to have, reach all those MSMEs, but at the same time, help Ricardo's business grow and continue that path of growth as a startup. And I think that is where it happened, right? As Ricardo mentioned, we are, as an investor, that is how we've found the sweet spot for this partnership to work, where we are like an advisor of sorts for the company. They are very clear on what they want. They're very clear on their objective. And when they came to us, they had they knew very well what they wanted to do, but they had a problem, you know, funding was a problem, reaching MSMEs was a problem. And I think that TMS provided that, that free, um, free network, you know, for them to really try out those solutions that they wouldn't have been able to launch if it hadn't been for the partnership. Creating that LMS, you know, was part of something that they wanted to do to impact a broader network of fintech companies and also MSMEs, but they couldn't do that. They didn't have the time, they didn't have the funding, and I think that Suba's model would have changed eventually, but I don't think in the time that we have been working with them. Because again, they needed not just the funding, but somebody also to help them validate that that solution that they had thought about was really going to work. Ricardo.
Yep. Maybe I'll turn it over to a question that was posed to you, Arjun, which was to speak a little bit about the role of data flows in enhancing the changes that you're talking about, and how you see that kind of being an element that may have an impact on enhancing learning at both specific partner level, but also within the broader systems in which you're working.
Yeah, so I think information, so collecting data, analyzing it, and using it for more effective decision making is absolutely central to sort of system level learning. And at Gatsby, yeah, I think within each sector, you can see where you can find different places where you can build information systems and coordination mechanisms. And I'll just, I don't want to take up too much time, but just, I think you can do that within the government. Data that allows them to manage, understand what's happening in the sector, regulate and share that information out. Sector associations can do that. And I think a really important mechanism is the dialogue and feedback mechanisms between the private sector and government to help government adapt policies quickly to meet the needs of the sector and to allow private sector to influence government. So, I think there's a lot to say here, obviously, but maybe I'll just leave it at that, Ben.
Great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely critical. Great question I see coming through from Martha, asking about the role of inclusion in the learning process in terms of things like data flows, data sources, the perspectives that are being looked at, etc. Maybe I'll open that up to our full panel and invite anyone who'd like to tackle that to have a go. George, I see that you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think it really depends on, of course, it's contextual to the project or business or organization in question, but I think generally, whoever is trying to learn has to look at all the different stakeholders they're trying to work with and basically try to see what value are they giving them and directly speak to them. So I just think that if the intention is to learn, then you are in position, or you are forced, or you have to speak to everybody that you're trying to target and actually figure out what value are we giving them, and basically then try to analyze that based on that particular input and see where it takes you. But again, I would say it really depends on the context of the organization. Yeah.
And I might just add that it's something with IAM's work with fast cycle learning that certainly there's been a strong focus on ensuring that target groups have been adequately represented within the samples so that they're not being overlooked. And even if initially it appears that the sample really is going to only include, say, a certain type of respondent, that's, there's more probing to see whether that's indeed appropriate. And typically that involves a process of making a more inclusive sample.
But again, Ben, of course, yes, definitely. The more users you can speak to in the target groups you work with, then the better you will have basic data of what you basically, whatever result you come with will depend on how far long you spoke to many different user groups along that chain. That's what I could add also, yeah.
That's great. Maybe one last point I'd love to raise, and again, I'll leave it as open to our panel. This was something that was raised last in our first webinar in the series by one of the participants who asked, how do you face challenges in kind of sparking interest in a topic like learning? Is it about the language you're using? Or how do you kind of open up this in a way that it doesn't sound academic or theoretical and really is being connected to the core business concerns and challenges that are facing the sectors in which we're focusing, the topics of resilience, competitiveness, inclusion. So I'd love to hear from the panelists on what your experiences have been in really bringing this to light and kind of unlocking that interest.
Yeah, maybe Ben, I can jump in quickly. I think that's absolutely critical. And in Gatsby, we try and spark that interest with our sector stakeholders, whether government or private sector. And I don't think you ever frame it in terms of learning. It's framed in terms of a big opportunity or a challenge that you're trying to address, right? And then there are lots of mechanisms you can use. You can bring data, you can go on exposure visits, you can do peer-to-peer learning. And so, yeah, and so I think it's important not to frame it as learning, but to frame it around something that excites and motivates sector stakeholders. I'll let the other panelists jump in.
I think from our side, definitely how we have talked about with our actors, market actors, and other partners, this is just trying to tell them, for example, this is not a full learning process, and learning as a word, as the other panelists have mentioned, but just posing that challenge to them, right? You are a leader in the sector. For example, I work a lot with chambers of commerce and other business service providers that have that potential to impact a lot of companies that they work with at the same time. So it's like the challenge for them is you need to improve your services and your programs to be able to scale that quality in them and pass that to these MSMEs. One of the challenges that we have in Honduras is that the quality of some products and services that MSMEs are having really lack that quality to be able to reach other markets, go out of country and connect with new markets. And that has been something that has really helped us, because they really want that impact they really want to impact those companies that they're working with, those MSMEs, those micro enterprises, those entrepreneurs. And that has been like a challenge, but at the same time, motivation for them. I want to be better. We didn't come up to them and tell them like, you need to learn this, you need to learn that. No, we came to them and told them, you're already doing this and you're doing it very well, but we think that we could do it better. And for us, that has been really like the guiding and the whole learning process that we've done with them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kata. Well, looking at the time, I think we're going to have to wrap up. I know we could have kept on discussing for quite a bit longer, but I'm very grateful to both our panelists for sharing all of their experiences and wisdom, lessons learned, etc., as well as all of you who joined us today. We have a lot of resources available to share with you. And we've been posting them both in the chat as well as on this website, on this PowerPoint slide. So we have the recordings of the last webinar, and shortly we'll have a recording for this one posted on the MSP YouTube channel. We have the MSP newsletter where you can find more and all the new things that MSP's up to. Of course, we have the link to the learning paper itself, the Shifting the Locus of Learning paper. And we have just released at the start of this week a complimentary brief from the perspective of MEL managers who have been taking this on within the context of their own programs and sharing the lessons that they've been having in doing so. And so all of those are available to take a look at. And if you have any thoughts, reflections, comments, etc., we'd love to hear it. So please do reach out and get in touch with us. So with that, I'll bring today to the close. And thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.